constitution est suspendue.
The Sahel region has been a hotbed for violent extremist activities.
Military rulers tend to be very heavy-handed.
Yes, it is the coup belt, but it's been the coup belt since independence.
The Sahel has faced political, environmental, and security turmoil for decades, and there are more deaths there categorized as terror-related than the rest of the world combined. So what is it about this region that makes it so unstable and one of the most dangerous places to live? And what do Russia, China, and France have to do with it? The Sahel, located just south of the world's largest desert, expands from the Atlantic Ocean in the west to the Red Sea in the east. According to the UN, it is made up of these 10 countries.
They are largely desert areas, lots of pastoralist communities, a lot of Berber communities. The southern parts of those countries tend to be much greener. They are considered to be the bread baskets of that region. But for the most part, the Sahel is a dry, vast desert area that stretches from Mali all the way to Sudan.
The area has a lot of young people and some of the highest birth rates in the world, with almost 2/3 of the population under 25. It has also been adversely affected by climate change.
The more resources become more scarce, the more they accelerate and contribute towards conflict in the region, because then it's a matter of survival.
A lot of different tribes and ethnic communities call the Sahel home, and tensions between these groups are exacerbated by the lack of resources. All of this has allowed the region to become a crucible for three things: bad governance, extremist organizations, and foreign influence. Since gaining independence in the mid-20th century, genuine democratic exchange in the Sahel has sometimes been hard to come by.
Real democracy has never been experienced by the population at large.
Every country in the Sahel, except Senegal, has experienced a coup or attempted coup in the 21st century. Many of them more than once.
Armies in these countries tend to be very heavily politicized as a result of their own colonial histories and their political involvement. During periods of instability, they tend to be predisposed towards intervening politically.
Juntas, governments run by military officers, have been found across most of the Sahelian countries at one time or another, and these juntas often have popular support.
What is very important is that people have been protesting for change, and for them the change has been the new military rule. People are supporting the military powers today.
Citizens in Mali were protesting President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta for months before the coup in 2021, calling for his resignation amid complaints of corruption, poor management of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the government's failure to tackle Islamist insurgents. The inability to combat the ongoing jihadi crisis was also central to the coup, which took place in Burkina Faso 8 months later. The following year, Niger's pro-Western president Mohamed Bazoum was overthrown in a military coup amidst a climate of anti-French sentiment and yet another perceived failure to combat insurgent groups in the region.
It is very important to look at the reason why militarism is so widespread in the region. The military have also been very powerful, very often under civilian rule.
So once they are in power, how have the hunters dealt with the security threats in the Sahel?
Unfortunately, they haven't done a very good job as well. In fact, things have gotten worse under their rulership. Perhaps amongst other things because they aren't necessarily trained, to be able to manage public administration as compared to being military officers.
Africa has tragically remained the epicenter of global terrorism.
In 2024, there were more terror-related deaths in the region than the rest of the world combined, according to the Global Terror Index.
There are two main groups that are operating in the Sahel. One of them is Al-Qaeda's Jamaat Nusrat al-Islam al-Muslimin, and the other one is Islamic State, which calls itself the Sahel province.
It's important to know that those Al-Qaeda and Islamic State affiliated groups are competing one to each other. So it is absolutely impossible to consider that there is only one jihadi movement in the region.
Other groups like Boko Haram have gained international notoriety for their activities in the Sahel, such as the kidnapping of 276 Nigerian schoolgirls in 2014, many of whom hadn't returned home 10 years later. Conflict deaths in the Sahel have reached their highest ever level in 2024, surpassing 25,000 for the first time since records began. Back in the central Sahel, where hunters promised to combat jihadist insurgencies, Jenim and IS actually expanded, with the latter doubling the amount of territory they control in Mali. In these areas, the jihadi groups operate a state-like administration, providing services and even enforcing their own criminal code. They often fund this with criminal activities, such as kidnapping for ransom and charging taxes for protection.
You can see that beyond taking the taxes called the zakat, which is an abuse against civilians, they are trying to administer justice in particular based on the Sharia law. So they have an alternative kind of governance which can also be authoritarian, but which is also trying to show some respect to the rights of the population.
These organizations also recruit people to join their ranks.
In many instances, people tend to be in a point of choicelessness by the time they decide to join a militant group. These are communities that are very vulnerable. They are caught between a wave of militant attacks and sometimes allegations of government abuses for being seen as cooperating with militants.
But not everyone is willing to sign up with these insurgents. Self-defense organizations have sprung up across the Sahel, sometimes backed by the state.
What is very interesting as regards self-defense groups is that they have been set by the populations themselves.
With more citizens taking up arms, what used to be occasional inter-communal fighting has now turned into violent conflict, creating more opportunities for Jenim and IS. But insurgent groups are not the only outsiders with an interest in the Sahel.
You have lots of foreign influences in the Sahel, and all of them has been changing in the recent years.
Like a lot of Africa, many Sahelian countries were former colonies of Western powers, specifically France.
The central government, unable to cope with rebellion in such a vast and undeveloped territory, has had to turn to France for help.
In the middle of the 20th century, they gained independence, but France maintained a heavy hand in the region, known as France-Afrique, and often involved itself militarily in the Sahel.
The approach adopted by France was the need to strengthen the militarized approach. And this approach, in many ways, wasn't devoid of an existing belief amongst the region that this was simply reenactment of colonial objectives.
This discontent often fueled protests against governments that were seen to be too close to France.
When it was becoming glaring that French presence in the region wasn't necessarily solving the problem, the junta stepped in and amplified the narrative that said, hey, it's time to leave.
Other Western states and organizations have also reduced their presence in the Sahel. The MINUSMA, the UN peacekeeping mission in Mali, was one of the deadliest and costliest peacekeeping missions of all time. But its withdrawal is creating a vacuum for other powers to move in.
On veut Poutine, on veut Iran, on veut Chine, mais égal.
Russian propaganda in the Sahel has largely been framed around Western failures in counter-terrorism. The paramilitary group Wagner, which has rebranded to Africa Corps since its leader Yevgeny Prigozhin's death in 2023, has also maintained a presence in the region.
The Wagner Group had come in as a private security firm that would support the Sahelian governments to be able to take control of their counterinsurgency operations. There's a long time where Russia was denying the links between them. Their work is to train and to support the local armies to be able to counter the insurgency in the region. So far, it hasn't been as effective.
These Russian-backed militia have developed very close ties with some governments.
Russia's effectiveness hasn't yet been proven, but because the military governments have little choice in security partners, they are willing to maintain, or they're more eager to maintain, Russian paramilitary presence and security support.
Russia would appear to be interested in the Sahel since it holds the key to migration routes from sub-Saharan Africa into Europe, enabling it to put pressure on European countries. But minerals also play a key role. Niger is the 7th largest producer of uranium in the world, which makes it an important source for countries like China who want to expand their nuclear power plants. But uranium is not the only valuable natural resource in the Sahel. Gold mining is often unregulated and also a huge source of income for local governments, militias, insurgent groups, and criminal organizations alike.
The industrial sector is still very much controlled by the government, but artisanal mines are areas where militant groups, because of essentially lawlessness, they're able to now drive and impose rules and taxes and even sell the gold for themselves.
China is also investing and involving itself in the Sahel for these rich mineral resources it needs for technology and other industrial advancements.
Something that hasn't received so much attention is the hardware component of AI. Now we need to think about the mineral resources that are required, to create the hardware components of AI. All right, and some of these, a huge amount of some of these resources can be found in the Sahel region.
China's Belt and Road Initiative, an immense global infrastructure project, has touched every country in the Sahel in the superpower's bid to increase its influence. The Sahel and all its natural resources is poised to become an important place in the coming years.
The situation in the Sahel is not going to get better anytime soon. And one of the reasons why is because the states in the region are particularly fragile.
The likelihood of military rule ending at this point seems quite diminished. The fact that people will still continue to be at the center of insurgencies in the coming years is likely to continue being a mainstay.
With extremism, instability and poverty on the rise, is the Sahel the most dangerous place on earth?